This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
Hi again, everyone. It's Brian Howie. Welcome to the Great Love Debate, the world's #1 dating and relationship podcast. Since 2015, I am in the very fine studios of Pod Populi. I am at the one in Scottsdale, Arizona. And as I told you, Scottsdale is an old term for bottomless mimosas. That's the etymology of the word Scottsdale. Somebody asked me a few days ago, and it's amazing how many of these shows I start with. Somebody asked me the other day, but they do, and that's how things get triggered in my head. Because every great idea and every sort of great thing and every conversation or relationship starts that way, with somebody asking something. Somebody starts with a question. How are you? Who are you? Will you go out with me? Will you marry me? Do you want this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? All of them. They're all questions, and they're all something that you can sort of look at as a starting point. And what that starting point is and where it leads, I don't know, but you always got to start somewhere. So back to this starting point again. Somebody asked me, they go, you say a lot of the same things over and over. Do you believe all of those things? They might have said that, or they might have said, do you still believe all of those things? Because they're like, well, at some point he must have believed it or he said it. I don't know. But did you still, the things you say over and over, sort of the tenets of this show, do you believe them? And I said, of course. I answered that question with a question. I was probably defensively. I said, like what? Like, what do I say that you think I don't believe? And they said, well, we know you always say that women look for red flags and men look for green lights. Do you believe that to be true? And I said, absolutely. Absolutely, I believe that's true. Probably more than ever. And then they said, you say something like, and they paraphrased me wrong. And if you're going to quote me, get it right. And they said, you say women want the men to try harder, men want the women to make it easier. Do you still believe that? And I said, I do. Absolutely, more than ever. And then they said, do you believe that being asked why are you still single is a compliment? Why are you still single? Is that a compliment? Yes, I said. I said, absolutely, for sure. There's no doubt that it is. If you're insecure about your own sort of single status and you don't like any inquiries about that, that's your problem. But the question itself, it comes from a place that's actually a referendum on your desirability, and you should embrace it as such. They don't ask, why are you still single, to people who don't seem attractive to date. They don't. So own it, accept it, deal with it, and thank the person who asks it. But next on their list, and they actually had a list. They got some of them wrong, but they had like this list of things that they have heard me say more than once. And I say, and I always say this at our live shows, I say, it's never that you haven't met the right person. It's always that you haven't been the right person. So they asked me if I still believe that or if I do believe that. And then I said, ugh. And here's why. So I say it all the time, and I still believe 98% of the time that's true. And when I say it at our live shows, there's always a reaction to it that people don't like to hear that, because it puts the burden of their relationship status or lack thereof, it puts it on them. And people don't ever want to take responsibility, even though if you take responsibility, that means you're somewhat in control of the outcome. And being in control of the outcome is probably the best way to get into a relationship or to be in a relationship. But a few years ago, I did make a change to that, and it was subtle, and people might not notice the difference, but I added an almost. I added an exception. So now it's almost always that you haven't been the right person. And that doesn't sound as good. And I don't like that it's like that. And it's not as catchy. I love big blanket statements. I love wild generalizations. That's what we do here at the Great Love Debate. But by adding the almost, it's a little more accurate. So what made me change that? Well, I did a show in Charlotte, North Carolina a couple years ago. And a woman at that show came up to me afterwards when it was over, and she said, she just looked at me and she goes, that wasn't true for me. And I said, what? Which part of the show wasn't true for you? And she said that I hadn't been the right person. And so I said, well, what happened? And she looked at me very seriously and she said, I bet on the wrong horse. And when she said that, I was like, you know what? I knew exactly what she meant by that. Because I am a horse racing fan and I'm a gambler. And I like the way that she said an analogy that I completely understood. I knew what she meant. And I felt terrible for overlooking that exception because it is real. It's a real thing. You put all your eggs in a broken basket that you may or may not be aware that it's broken. And sometimes years go by, and I have been the broken basket. Many times I felt like someone I dated bet on the wrong horse, and that horse was me, and they kept waiting for me to get it or wake up or understand or change in some way. And you can say about anything in any relationship, you know, whether it's working or not, well, that's dating and that's the luck of the draw. And that is true. But there's one exception to that. And it really hits harder for a certain group of people. And a certain group of people happens to be a giant percentage of the people who listen to this show. Lots of you listening to this are going to fall into this category of what I'm going to talk about in the next couple minutes. If you bet on the wrong horse in your 20s, that's part of life experiences. Probably shouldn't be getting on too long a ride in your 20s anyway. But if you bet on the wrong horse in your 30s, especially if you're a woman, it can be life-changing. And it can be fate-altering. And it can be crushing. And so let me explain that a little bit. So if you're a woman and you get into a relationship with a guy at, say, 33, you really have to get it right if you are going down the road with this. Because if he is not the right horse, you better get off that horse. Because if you start out at 33 and 3, 4, 5 years go by and you haven't gotten married or the relationship isn't where you want it to be and you haven't started that family and you just haven't gotten to the place of the happily ever after and you come out of that relationship at 37, 38, 39, that is an entirely different and entirely more difficult place to be if you want all the things you wanted at 33. You do that at 23 and you come out of it at 27, it's the same. It's essentially the same. You come out of it at 53 and you come out at 57, it's essentially the same. But 33 and 37 is wildly different. And I had one of those relationships. I think I actually had two relationships where I gobbled up chunks of somebody's 30s. And that's not really my fault. You know, I was who I was, but they bet on the horse. They bet on the Howie horse to be the right one that was going to go 50 years with them or go to the place they wanted to go. And maybe I wasn't emotionally capable at that time, or maybe I was just fine in a, B- relationship, or I wasn't as serious about things, but they kept thinking that this was the horse. And, I wasn't who I wasn't. I don't know. Didn't work out. And this is always such a delicate conversation on this podcast. And I don't bring it up that often, even though it's really important because, like I said, it's a really big percentage of the audience who tends to put blinders on and not pay attention to this. But it's deeply personal and a deeply treacherous area to get into. I don't want to hear about what you read in your egg freezing pamphlet. I don't want to hear about it. And I don't want to hear about the outlier of the woman in your Pilates class who had twins at 46. Like, I don't want to hear about it because you're using outliers to choose your dating path. And that's not a wise idea. We talked about the generalizations earlier. The generalizations are because it is a numbers game and you got to play the odds, just like horse racing. So, and I don't want to hear about Pilates at all when it comes to this, because we had somebody on this podcast about 6 years ago, and she's like, "I'm fine. I can have kids in my 40s because I do Pilates." And she's like, "I'm like, your insides don't always match your outsides in terms of science and aging and fertility and all that kind of stuff. There is a lifetime of difference between 33 and 37 with what we are talking about. And I know you guys know what we are talking about. Even in the options in the dating pool get way, way smaller. If he's 37 and you're 37, if he doesn't want kids or he already has them, you're probably a bit too young because you still probably have a kid. And if he doesn't want kids, if he does want kids, you're in a position where you're not going to have 3. You're just not. And possibly not even 1 or 2. And that's harsh, and people get mad when I say that, but that's a real thing. It is. But this whole discussion that I'm having here, it's not about fertility as much as it's about choices. And anyone can make the choice to go all in with someone because you're betting on the pot of gold if it works out. That's the upside. And it isn't your fault if it doesn't work out. And it wasn't wrong for you to believe with this person in the magic and the possibility and ultimately the outcome. And it wasn't out of the scope of reason to think that you were right and it was right and he was right. And if I'm saying he, I lost my train of thought and all that because I'm saying that if he's it, because it isn't much a big deal for the guys. That's why I'm saying the he. It just isn't. Sorry. Age doesn't matter nearly as much, and that probably is unfair, but it's unfair to pretend that isn't the reality. You're being unfair to yourself. And to learn how to to kind of deal with reality and avoid the painful pitfalls of a 4 or 5 year situation that doesn't work out, you got to decide earlier if he wasn't ready or he's not ready with you. You got to get off the horse or kick him or train him or speed him up, whatever it takes. You can't dick around waiting for him to learn how to be the right horse. It's your responsibility to recognize the signs. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So we're going to explore this a little bit more. Sorry, it's not as fun a topic as we normally get into around here, but we got to earn the gambling money. So I got to take a quick break, and we will be back right after this. And we are back to talk about literal horses. As I said earlier, I'm a huge horse racing fan. So forgive the metaphors, but all the bloodlines and the breeding and the talent and the development in the world, the horse acts the part, he looks the part, maybe he just can't run. That happens. There was a Kentucky Derby winner, War Emblem. He won the Derby in 2002. It's a shame that I know this. It's sad that I know this. Turned out to be a gay horse. He was gay. So they spent a lot of money on can't test for that. They spent a lot of money on the breeding rights, and they just could not get him excited around the mares. They just couldn't. And, people paid a lot of money to try and breed this horse and breed with this horse, and he just didn't like the ladies. Sorry. So he had all the breeding, and he had the bloodlines, and he had the talent, and he had all of it, and just didn't work out. So somebody lost a lot of money because he was a gay horse, which is fine, but they didn't care about him having a good relationship with a stallion. They wanted him to breed with the mares, and it didn't work out. But so sometimes they can't run, or they can't run far or fast, and that's not the fault of the owner or the trainer or the jockey. They just couldn't see it, or maybe they could. Or maybe they wanted it to work out so bad because they had so much invested in it that they overlooked the things that probably could have shown up. Because once you have sunk an investment into it, whether you paid money for this or you put time into the relationship, then you tend to either overlook or blur the things that are important that are going to make you make a decision that you really don't want to make, which is I don't want to do this anymore, or I can't, or this is not going the way I want to go. And the more time and the more effort and the more money and the resources you put into it, the less likely you want to have that conversation with yourself, much less the other person. So, you're kind of saying that you didn't see what you didn't want to see. Or are you saying that there was absolutely no way to see what they were or what they could be, or you were too deep into it, except just go for it? And I think that's what that woman was saying to me in Charlotte. Like, there was no way I could see it. And at some point, I just had to go down this road and hope it works out, which is, life is about ROI. It's not a sunk cost. It's not, diminishing returns. It's the need for a payoff. Every time you go out with somebody, the first time, the 10th time, a lifetime, you are looking for a payoff. And that's hard for everyone to see and do in a moment, much less a month or a year or an entire relationship. So we can't tell you to go for it at the Great Love Debate and then constantly tell you to be looking for a way out. That's a really, really hard way to date. You can't sort of play it halfway. You kind of have to go for it. And sometimes you go for it and you continue going for it. And we've done a bunch of podcasts even this year about